This podcast is for educational and informational purposes only and is not medical advice. Peptides are research compounds and not approved for human use in many cases. Always consult a qualified healthcare professional before making any decisions related to your health. Today we're diving into something that's been getting a lot of attention in the peptide and neuro research space, and that is P21, sometimes written as P021. If you've been exploring cognitive health, brain optimization, or even future-focused anti-aging strategies, you've probably seen this name pop up. It sounds simple, just a short peptide, but the mechanism behind it is actually pretty fascinating and honestly pretty powerful when you understand what it's doing at the cellular level. So, let's start simple. P21 is a synthetic peptide fragment that was originally derived from a naturally occurring protein in the body called ciliary neurotrophic factor, often shortened to CNTF. That protein plays a role in supporting neuron survival and growth, but researchers wanted to isolate the part of it that was most effective and make it more stable, more targeted, and easier to use in research settings. That's where P21 comes in. It's basically a refined version, a concentrated signal that tells the brain to grow, repair, and protect itself. Now here's where it gets interesting. P21 is often talked about alongside something called BDNF, which stands for brain-derived neurotrophic factor. If you've been around peptides at all, you've probably heard of BDNF. It's one of the most important growth factors in the brain. Think of it like fertilizer for your neurons. It helps them grow, form new connections, and stay alive under stress. P21 works by increasing the expression of BDNF. Not just a little bit, but significantly in certain research models. And that's important because as we age, or when we deal with neurological conditions, BDNF levels can drop. When that happens, the brain loses some of its ability to adapt, to repair, and to form new neural pathways. That's when you start to see issues with memory, cognition, mood, and overall brain resilience. So what P21 is doing is essentially telling your brain to turn that system back on. It's like flipping a switch that says, hey, let's start building again. Let's repair. Let's reconnect. Let's strengthen what's already there. Another key mechanism of P21 is its effect on something called NGF, nerve growth factor. This is another protein that supports neuron health, especially in areas of the brain related to memory and learning. When NGF is active, neurons are more likely to survive and function properly. When it's low, those same neurons can become vulnerable, especially in conditions where degeneration is involved. So now you've got P21 increasing both BDNF and NGF. That's a pretty strong combination when you're talking about neuroprotection and neuroregeneration. But it doesn't stop there. P21 has also been shown in research to reduce amyloid beta accumulation. That's a big deal. Amyloid beta is one of the proteins that builds up in the brain in conditions like Alzheimer's disease. It forms plaques that interfere with communication between neurons and can eventually lead to cell death. By reducing amyloid beta, P21 is essentially helping to keep those pathways clear. It's like preventing buildup in a system that needs to stay clean in order to function properly. There's also evidence that P21 helps reduce oxidative stress in the brain. Oxidative stress is basically damage caused by free radicals, unstable molecules that can harm cells over time. The brain is especially vulnerable to this because it uses a lot of energy and oxygen. So anything that reduces oxidative stress is going to help protect brain tissue and slow down aging at a cellular level. Now, let's talk about neurogenesis. This is the process of creating new neurons. For a long time, people believed that once you were an adult, your brain stopped making new neurons. But we now know that's not true. The brain can generate new neurons, especially in areas like the hippocampus, which is heavily involved in memory and learning. P21 appears to support this process. It encourages the brain not just to protect what's already there, but to actually create new neural cells and integrate them into existing networks. That's huge when you're thinking about long-term cognitive health. So when people talk about P21, they're usually thinking about a few key areas. One is cognitive enhancement, meaning improved memory, focus, and learning ability. Another is neuroprotection, helping to prevent or slow down damage to the brain. And the third is neuroregeneration, actually repairing and rebuilding neural pathways. Now, let's zoom out a little bit and talk about how this might apply in real-life scenarios, at least from an educational standpoint. As we age, it's normal for cognitive function to decline somewhat. You might notice it in small ways at first, like forgetting names, losing track of what you were doing, or taking a little longer to process information. Over time, that can become more pronounced, especially if other factors are involved like stress, inflammation, or underlying conditions. What P21 is targeting is that underlying decline. It's not just masking symptoms. It's going after the root mechanisms that drive cognitive aging, like reduced growth factor signaling, increased oxidative stress, and accumulation of harmful proteins. Another area where P21 gets attention is in neurodegenerative conditions. Again, we're speaking educationally here, but conditions that involve loss of neurons, inflammation, and impaired signaling pathways are exactly the kind of environment where something like P21 could theoretically make a difference. By increasing growth factors and reducing damaging processes, it creates a more supportive environment for the brain. There's also interest in how P21 might affect mood and mental clarity. Since BDNF is involved not just in cognition but also in mood regulation, increasing BDNF levels can potentially support a more stable, positive mental state. That's why you'll sometimes see P21 mentioned in discussions about brain fog, mental fatigue, or even resilience under stress. Now, let's talk a little bit about timing because this is something that comes up a lot. People often ask when something like P21 would be most useful. Is it something you wait to use later in life? Or is it something you start earlier as a preventative approach? From a conceptual standpoint, you can think of it like this. There's a difference between prevention and intervention. Prevention is about maintaining optimal function before significant decline occurs. Intervention is about trying to restore function after decline has already started. P21 seems to sit right in the middle. It has properties that support both. It can help maintain healthy neural signaling and growth factor levels, which is preventative, but it also has mechanisms that target damage and degeneration, which is more intervention-focused. So the idea of when to use it really depends on what you're trying to achieve. Are you looking to optimize and maintain, or are you trying to repair and recover? Those are two different goals, and they might influence how something like this is approached in research settings. Another important piece of the puzzle is how P21 compares to other peptides in the same space. You'll often see it mentioned alongside things like Semax, Selank, or even BDNF mimetics. Each of these has its own mechanism and focus. Semax, for example, is known for its effects on dopamine and BDNF, often used for focus and cognitive enhancement. Selank is more tied to anxiety reduction and emotional balance. P21 is a bit more structural. It's less about immediate neurotransmitter changes and more about long-term changes in the brain's architecture and resilience. That's not to say one is better than the other. They just operate on different levels. Some are more acute, meaning you feel the effects quickly. Others are more foundational, meaning they work over time to change the underlying system. P21 definitely falls into that second category. It's not something that would be expected to produce instant noticeable effects. Instead, it's more about gradual improvement, supporting the brain's ability to adapt and repair itself over time. Let's also touch on safety from an educational standpoint. Because P21 is still in the research phase and not widely approved for clinical use, there's a lot we don't fully know yet. Most of the data comes from animal studies and early research models. That means while the mechanisms are promising, they're not fully validated in large-scale human trials. That's why it's important to approach this kind of information with a balanced perspective. There's potential, but there's also uncertainty. And that's true for a lot of peptides in this space. One thing that is clear, though, is that the brain is incredibly adaptable. It has the ability to change, to grow, and to recover in ways that we're still learning about. Compounds like P21 are part of that exploration. They're tools that researchers are using to understand how we might support that adaptability more effectively. So if you take a step back and look at the big picture, P21 represents a shift in how we think about brain health. Instead of just treating symptoms after they appear, the focus is moving towards supporting the brain's natural ability to maintain and repair itself. It's about working with the system rather than against it. And that's a powerful concept because it opens the door to new ways of thinking about aging, cognition, and overall neurological health. Before we wrap up, let's bring it all together in a simple way. P21 is a synthetic peptide designed to enhance brain function by increasing key growth factors like BDNF and NGF, reducing harmful processes like amyloid buildup and oxidative stress, and supporting the creation of new neurons. It's not a quick fix. It's more like a long-term support system for the brain. Whether you're looking at it from a research perspective, an educational standpoint, or just pure curiosity, it's definitely one of the more interesting compounds being explored right now in the world of neuropeptides. This podcast is for educational and informational purposes only and is not medical advice. Always consult a qualified healthcare professional before making any decisions related to your health or use of any compounds. Thanks for listening, keep learning, and stay curious.